Practice. It's all about practice. This part is about subnetting. It's heavily weighted towards skills. You need to practice. But you don't just need to practice any old way. There are ways that work better. So in this part review, I'll talk to you about traditional part review things to do, but I'll also give you a how to go about studying subnetting once you've learned the basics to get you ready for the exam. All right, let's talk about it. So for this part review, as promised, we'll start talking about subnetting practice. I'll get you set up with a great plan for that. Then I'll broaden the discussion for all of prep for this part review, including the knowledge-based topics. And then I'll take one more look at that subnetting prep and give you some good tactics and focus on the things you need to do leading up to exam day and to be ready for the exam event itself. All right, let's get into it. So let me give you a little advice coming out of this part for subnetting. Here's a review and reminder of the processes that you learned about during this part. And you should be great at those processes, all right? You should have them down. You shouldn't have to look at your notes to figure out how to do them. But there are some ways to practice that are better than others. First off, you should vary which processes you practice over time. The exam is not going to ask you only questions about one little process and identify the process, and then later ask you only about another subnetting process. In fact, the subnetting is going to be integrated into questions about routing and routing protocols, all right? It's not that it's hidden, it's just integrated into how networking works. So you want to do that in practice. Try all the different processes varied. Then you want to use short practices, not huge massed practices. Like don't do 3 2-hour subnetting sessions thinking that'll cover it. Do 10 minutes a day, all right? Or if you're studying 5 days a week, do 10 minutes each of those 5 days that you're studying for CCNA. You should also interleave subnetting topics with your next study topics in order. For instance, whatever the next chapter number is that you're studying, do that, then maybe do a few on find all subnets, do a little more on some other topic, do some problems on finding the number of hosts and subnets. Likewise, next chapter, maybe do some that about finding the 4 facts about a subnet. All right, so that's the idea. So vary the processes you're practicing, short practices, and interleave subnetting with other topics. Additionally, thinking back to the books, it's in volume 1, the subnetting topics in this part 4 topic. And in the current edition of the book, that content is in chapters 11 through 15. That may change with the next edition, who knows, but those are the chapters right now. Why do I mention that specifically here? Well, if you have the books and you're using those, there's lots of subnetting practice available with the books. You should take advantage of that. And if you go to the chapters themselves, you'll see chapters 12 through 15 are the ones that cover those same processes, all right? Inside the chapters, there are some practice problems with the answers at the ends of the chapters, so you've got a few there to look at. In addition, there are other practice problems at the, quote, companion website, and that's the publisher's way to say, here's a web page associated with this book that it has electronic elements of the book. And that's true of pretty much every Cisco Press official cert guide. In this case, it's indexed by chapter, so if you go find those same chapters, 12, 13, 14, and 15, you'll find, get this, a static PDF of practice problems. And for 3 of those, you'll find an interactive version of those same problems where you'll see the problem, you can type the answer, and it'll tell you whether you got it right or not. All right, so a little bit of interactivity there if you prefer to do that. So there's plenty of practice integrated into the books. Now, if you don't want to go looking for that, or if you don't even have the books, go to my blog site. It's always free. It has been forever. So if you click on the Q&A title bar menu, you'll get a pull-down list, and part of the items in that list, it's indexed by the book chapter about subnetting. It lists chapters 11 through 15. And if you look over on the right, we see things like, hey, there's some address rule breakers. These are blog posts that give you problems like, hey, which of these addresses are illegal addresses? All the way through analyzing classful networks down to mass design drills there at the very end. So more practice problems available at the blog. So when you're looking for problems and tasks and things to do to practice, those are a couple of great resources. And of course, you got this YouTube channel. So just to recap those, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 integrated ad hoc exercises built into this part. So just make sure to look back for those. You may have already done them all recently. So maybe you check out the blog and the book site first, but come back to these. They're available to you any old time on YouTube, of course. So check those out for more exercises and advice and practice for subnetting. Now, in the previous part, I capped off that part by adding a new lab and making some videos about that, all about collecting many things you do with LAN switching into one big lab. Well, part 4, there are no CLI commands. So I said, well, I can't really make a big lab. But what did I do? I made a big subnetting exercise. So it uses the topology you see here. And in this big subnetting exercise, you'll do things like find the lowest and highest subnet IDs of 3 different networks and plan which of those subnets to use in this topology. You'll plan specifically which addresses to use for the devices, both in the LANs and in the WANs. You'll create sample config in a text editor, and if you have the appropriate skill set to give it a try, you can even try it out in Cisco Packet Tracer and see if it works. All right, so feel free to check that out and try that. I'm going to release the big subnetting lab probably a week or 2 after I first release this part review video, so just be warned that it may not be available for a week or 2, depending on timing, but it's on the way. Next up, there are paid products you can use to practice your subnetting as well. You can see them all at this direct link if you'd like to go there. Let me mention them to you in case you really want to get into some depth. If you join the O'Reilly Learning site, it costs money per month, so I know most of you won't go there. But if you did, I do teach about 2 or 3 times a year a 2-day course on IP subnetting if you'd like to attend. Additionally, for not a lot of money, I have both a video course and a practice questions kit. Now, the practice questions kit is probably more applicable here since you've got these free videos on my YouTube channel now that you can watch to learn about subnetting. But the practice question kit, the usual price is somewhere in the $12 to $13 range, and it's over 900 subnetting practice questions. The kicker on that is if you get one wrong and you wonder why you got it wrong, the explanation goes into detail about the process, and the process matches the kind of things I've taught you in these videos, all right? So it matches up to both the course and the book way to go about finding the answers. So you get reinforcement on what I've already told you is the right way and the best way to find the answers. So you can check that out if you think, I really would enjoy having lots more practice. But as you can see, there are a lot of sources for practice problems. So you can purchase those with a discount. If you start up there at that link at the top and click through, you'll find those products. All right, what else? How-to videos. If you want to know how to reach all these different resources, I didn't put it in this video. I've got another one that does that. It's above my head now in that card that shows up here. So click through, watch that video. For instance, if you want to know how to get to the companion website in order to find those resources for the book as an example. So thinking about everything in the part for a moment, you should use the chapter review and part review questions during part review like you should in every part review. The best way to do that is to use the PearsonTestPrep.com website. By now, since this is part 4 of the first volume, you should have already gotten in there and gotten established. All right. If you haven't yet and you think, well, I'd like to do that now, I'm not going to repeat those details here. The card above my head showing up here, that is a video for part 2 review, as it turns out, that goes through the details of how to get established and set up so you can find those questions. However, I don't want you to do those questions just yet. So I'm going to tell you more about that here in just a second. There are not any specific labs at my Cert Skills website for part 4 because there aren't any CLI commands. But the next 2 parts are lab heavy on IP version 4 addressing and subnetting. But the labs aren't, hey, let's talk about subnetting. They're, let's talk about IP addressing and routing protocols, specifically OSPF as a routing protocol. So here's the suggestion. When you're doing labs for the next several parts, you should always slow down and look at the addressing and subnetting to make sure you understand it. And if you don't, go figure it out and ask questions, all right? It's just a great way to force yourself to think, hey, this, as time goes on and as you continue to practice subnetting, the subnetting part of this work in the next topics should become second nature. All right. It should fade into the background and become automatic. So work on that as you move through those labs. Additionally, if you've got the books, there are key topics marked inside the book chapters. You should review those. You can just flip the pages and look for the little icons out in the margins that say key topics. There's also PDFs with the key topic information in them on the companion website. You can look for additional subnetting videos on the companion website. There are some additional videos that you can look at there. Especially there's one on finding all subnets of a network in that unusual case with more than 8 subnet bits that gets you to lots and lots of subnet IDs. You can review key terminology, key terms and lingo. You can just look at the definitions in the back of the book, but it's way easier to go to the companion website and look at the flashcards there, for instance. And just to point out where to find things, here's an image of the companion website for the Volume 1 book. And these little buttons on the left, you can click them and, for instance, click there at Key Topics to just see the key topics, or click there to get to the video training. All right, last thing on sequence. Since this is such a weird part, it's not just a bunch of concepts and then a bunch of config, all right? So in this case, I would say right now, I'm assuming that you're watching this just after you finished learning all the topics in this part of the book. Well, you should continue to practice the processes and get faster at them. That's your number one priority. All right. And then once you're getting better and faster, then maybe do some review of key topics, key terms, maybe those extra videos. So this is your timeline, and those are your first 2 things. But once you begin to get to the point where you think, I know these processes, I'm fast enough, then circle back to the chapter and part review Q&A. Why is that? In particular, the part review Q&A, these are networking questions that happen to require you to use subnetting math. And that's way more exam realistic. If you can do these, you are well ready for CCNA, for the actual exam. So you want to do those after you're good at the underlying math. You should practice subnetting regularly until you always get the correct answer and you're fast enough for the exam. And we're going to talk about how fast that is here in just a second. Once you get where you can always answer correctly fast enough, then you could practice occasionally until exam day, but don't just set it aside and don't touch it again. So still continue to practice a little here and there up until exam day. In addition to that, you need an exam day subnetting plan. And what is that, you ask? Well, I'm going to show you what I mean by that. All right, so normally at part review, I say take a couple of weeks after finishing before doing part review. Not this time. Go ahead and start practicing. The day that you finish your last instructional video on subnetting, get to practicing. Get on it. It's a skill you need to practice. And you need to self-evaluate to say, am I now fast enough for being on the CCNA exam? CCNA exam is timed. You can't mark a question, move on, and go back and answer that question later. All right, so you get the next question, you've got to answer that question then. So if you get one that's heavy in subnetting math, you got to do it then. All right, so here are my suggestions for how fast you ought to be able to do the 6 subnetting processes. Notice a couple of them I have asterisks beside to mean that's how long it should take you to think the answer. Some of them require some writing, and that'll take a little more time. For instance, you should see the pattern to find all subnet IDs and find the first few and the last few in 45 seconds. But, you know, if there's 256 subnets, you're clearly not going to write 256 subnets down in 45 seconds. On the exam, you're not going to have to type 256 subnets, right? They might have something that's like the 3rd lowest subnet ID or something like that, okay? So you need to self-evaluate, and you could do that right now. You could hit pause and think about, well, how long am I taking to answer questions about, hey, you know, here's an address 10.1.2.3. What class A, B, or C network is it in? What's the network ID? What's the network broadcast address? And so on. How long does it take me to answer that mentally? Not so much write it down, because the writing of the facts takes enough time to matter here. All right, so do some self-evaluation. Your speed goal may be less than mine. That's just what I think you need to be ready to do so that subnetting does not become a time pressure issue for you. Then when you're practicing, when you're always getting the right answer, get this, then when you're practicing, you should time yourself to see how long these problems are taking you, to see if you're meeting your speed goal. That's one of the reasons I built that subnetting practice questions kit. You could say, hey, give me 10 of this type, click go, start your timer before you click go, then you can see how long they took per question, and you got plenty of practice questions to do that with. All right. So watch your time, test yourself on time, make sure you're fast. Now, you don't have to go, completely crazy on that, but just don't fool yourself by saying, well, I'm getting the right answer, I'll be fine. You do need to be fast as well. Now, to help you go fast, you want to memorize some of those details of subnetting, but you can also have an exam day plan to use the laminated page that you have. So get this. You're going to get in the testing center. They're going to set you up in front of a PC. You're going to have a laminated page and a dry erase marker. Ask for a second one. Ask for a second marker, because sometimes the marker quits working so well on those pages. And they're going to set you up, and the timer doesn't start yet. It's going to ask you, do you want to take the tutorial about how the exam works? It's going to give you a page with all the legalese that you're supposed to read and approve. And they give you like 15 or 20 minutes to do all that. So while that's happening, you could write down powers of 2 or masks or masks à tête or multiples of the magic number on your laminated page before your exam timer actually starts. So that's the exam day plan that I'm talking about here. For instance, I think you should memorize things like the range of values in the first octet that identifies the class. But if you're having trouble remembering these ranges, write it down on your laminated sheet during that time, once you're there and settled before the exam timer starts. Or maybe you're having trouble remembering the default masks. Note those, for instance. Powers of 2. I personally don't memorize anything past 2 to the 16th, but maybe you're having trouble memorizing past 2 to the 12th. Write down the 2 to the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th values before that timer starts, for instance. All right, so things that you're having more difficulty remembering like that, jot those down. Then, remember how we use this multiple of the magic number process to find things like the subnet ID, right? And the only thing that tends to slow people down once they learn that process is, what if you've got an IP address and its value is somewhere up here in the high range, and you're counting by, say, 8. So you're counting 0, 8, 16, 24, and the address you're comparing it to is way up in here, and you feel like you've got to count all the way up there. Well, you could write down all the multiples of 8 beforehand, and then you've got at least those. But there are a couple of tricks that can help you along the way here. If you wrote down all the multiples of 8, you could put a little doodad out to the left of every other one, and those are the multiples of 16. And then put a little doodad out to the right of every fourth one. Every fourth one. Those are the multiples of 32. So now you've got this chart that shows you, hey, the multiples of 8 and 16 and 32, if that's been giving you trouble counting by multiples of 8, 16, and 32 for that particular process. Some people like that idea. It may not resonate with you, but there's something you would consider then, whether you'd want to use on exam day. Or if you like the idea, but that seemed like overkill, write down the multiples of 16 and mark every other one. Those are the multiples of 32. It's a little less writing that way. All right, so just some ideas for you there. Another table that sometimes people might want to write is that reminder of the 9 possible values in a dotted decimal mask and their corresponding binary values, which helps you with mask conversion, right? If you had this information, you could easily convert from decimal to binary, and once you have it in binary, it's really easy to get the prefix style mask, right? So more information that you might consider writing on your laminated sheet before your timer starts. All right, last bit here. So I want you to practice regularly until you can get the correct answer to all 6 of those processes. And it's fast enough for your plans. That means you've set a goal and you've measured yourself, or at least you've gotten a sense for how fast you're going. Afterwards, you can slow down the amount of practice you put in, but still, 10 minutes here and there to make sure you're remembering the process. And then make your plan so you know what it is that you're going to write on your laminated board once you're there on exam day. We're at the end of a part. If you really are ready for the next topics, click on the left. You'll get to the first video in the next part, which is about router interface IDs. If you're ready for that big subnetting exercise, click over there on the right. You'll get to the video that sets up that big exercise. Hey, thanks for hanging out. I'll see you in the next video.